Happy to see you.
Thank you, Aziz. Will you give me screen sharing privileges?
Yes.
Okay, so I just need to show a couple of slides, that's all.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second online session in my webinars. Tonight we are going to have a great discussion with Scott Thornbury, who is a linguist, educator, teacher trainer, author, and ITDI faculty. For those of you who don't know ITDI, it stands for the International Teacher Development Institute. So I'm happy to meet you, Scott. Welcome to Everyone Academy.
Thank you, Aziz.
I just want to remind the people that the main purpose or the main objective of the Everyone Academy is to encourage online collaboration among individuals to help teachers, teach in these very difficult times. So our webinars are free, and you can access them from the comfort of your home. So welcome, Scott. The floor is yours. So you can introduce yourself to the people who don't know you, but most of the teachers know you through your books, especially here in Morocco. Your books are very practical and useful for so many teachers. So welcome again.
Thank you, Aziz. Thank you. It's very nice to be here. And I'm speaking to you from Spain. Welcome to my friends in Morocco and beyond. I'm conscious that, in fact, in 1 or 2 days, it's Teachers' Day in a number of countries. I'm not sure if that's the case in Morocco, but if it is, then I wish you a very happy Teachers' Day, but particularly this year, because it's been such a hard year for everybody, but for teachers in particular. And I know that in Morocco, you teachers out there have been bearing the burden and I'm sure doing a fantastic job. So I congratulate you. And I hope that in the near future, you'll be back in the real classroom again and doing the job that you do so well. So Aziz has invited me to basically answer your questions, the questions that a number of you posted, and I've been through them. And I think in the time that we've got, I can't address all the questions, but I'll try to address some of them. And I've kind of organized them into categories. So if I'll just show how I've organized them. Basically, the majority of questions, or a large number of questions at least, address the question of a grammar focus in language teaching and the importance of it or not. And as you know, those of you who have read my books, I'm very interested in how grammar is taught, what grammar is taught, when it is taught, why it is taught, etc. So that I'll be talking about those kind of questions. And then there are a number of questions, or two questions, I think, about the use of the first language in the classroom, which is a subject which I'm very interested in, and I would like to address that because I think it's controversial, but at the same time, it doesn't go away, and I think we need to talk about it. There were some questions about, a number of questions about teaching speaking or teaching fluency in general, which is another subject which I've written about and I'm very interested in. And I'd like to address that. And related to that, of course, there's questions about pronunciation, which is, after all, it's a speaking skill. And I would like to address that too. Questions about vocabulary always interest me because I think vocabulary is perhaps underrated in terms of its importance in language teaching at the expense of grammar. So I would like to balance the discussion about grammar with addressing some of these questions, very good questions about vocabulary teaching. One question about error and correction, but I think it's important because it relates to all these fields we've been talking about grammar, pronunciation, and vocabulary, and also relates to the area of testing, of course, evaluation generally. We evaluate our learners and we correct them, but we also test them and evaluate them. And so questions about testing have a profound effect on what we do. Some good questions about professional development, which I hope we can get to. And finally, what I put into kind of miscellaneous questions on a range of subjects, which if we get to, I will happily discuss. Let's go back to the beginning. If that's okay. I've bundled together a number of questions here about grammar. And I think they are important because grammar does feature very largely in the curricula we teach, whether we're teaching young learners, teenagers, universities, students, adults, whether we're using locally produced course books or course books imported from outside, whether we're preparing learners for exams, for example, etc. The question comes up again and again as to, the first question, for example, should teachers teach and focus on all grammar structures, especially when students keep making the same mistakes? And I put the second question into the same category as grammar because it seems to me it's fundamental, this question of whether we're teaching the language or we're teaching about the language. And by that, I understand when we're teaching about the language, we're teaching principally about its grammar. And related to that is the methodology, which traditionally is used to teach grammar, which is the PPP model, the present, practice, and produce model for teaching grammar. And this also relates to the expectations we have over how quickly learners can learn the grammar and produce, as in question number 4, correct sentences in the space of a 60-minute lesson. And there's a nice question here about the passive voice. And I think the passive voice, and I said, teaching the passive brings together a number of these various issues. So I want to address these sort of one by one. And I want to make the general point, first of all, that there is more to language than grammar. There's more to language than grammar. We've inherited a view that language is grammar, and therefore to teach language, we should teach grammar. And this seems to me a very narrow view of what our job is. If we think of the big picture, what it is that we're trying to do when we teach a second language, we are hoping that at some point the learners will be able to use that second language to communicate to other speakers of that language effectively in contexts which we can't necessarily predict. But in the case of English, it's likely to be in some kind of international context. In other words, your English speaker from Morocco will be using English to talk to an English speaker from Russia, for example, or an English speaker from Uruguay will be using English to speak to an English speaker from Egypt, for example. So in other words, English is very much a special case in that it's an international language and it has its own standards and rules, etc. And we come back to that question when we look at pronunciation. But to do that job of communicating, is it sufficient to know the grammar of English and to know it in a kind of textbook kind of way? To know it, looking at question number 2 there, as a result of being taught about it. So I can tell you all the rules of English. I can tell you all the rules of lots of languages. I can look them up in a book. I can memorize them, but it doesn't put me, as we well know, it doesn't situate me in the right place when it comes to using that language for communicative purposes, whether it's speaking or whether it's writing. And for many of our students, it may only be writing that they'll need mainly to communicate in English through emails and etc. But whatever way, they will need more than grammar. And this is the problem, I think, is the way that what we've inherited about language teaching comes from models of education and models of language which prioritize grammar at the expense of other things that are involved in using a language. Now, of course, there's vocabulary. And language is nothing without vocabulary. In fact, you can communicate pretty successfully with vocabulary alone at a certain level. But tourists do this all the time, of course. And a few phrases. We mustn't underestimate the role that vocabulary plays and the importance that it has, and therefore how it must be prioritized in terms of what we teach. So if we just teach 90% grammar without and only 10% vocabulary, we're going to end up shortchanging the learners. They will not be equipped for the kind of communicative situations in which they're in. But also the ways that we use language, whether it's vocabulary or grammar, the way that we use language appropriately in particular circumstances, that the social uses of language, which go beyond grammar. So that's one of the problems. So that the grammar syllabus reduces communicative competence to a very, very small set of, or very small knowledge base, which is not necessarily the main knowledge base when you're communicating. The other thing is that that's the knowledge, but language is a skill. And just as we know with any skill, whether it's driving a car or playing the guitar or riding a horse or whatever, knowledge alone is not going to get you driving successfully on the motorway or playing the guitar in a way that is pleasant to the listener, or riding a horse without falling off. In other words, the knowledge alone is insufficient unless that knowledge is activated as a skill. And it doesn't follow that if you have the knowledge, you have the skill. I can know everything there is to know about driving a car, but if I don't get in a car and get onto the highway, then I cannot be said to be a driver. Now, for learners of a language like English, if they don't have the opportunity to use the language, then that skill will never be activated. Now, for English is special, as I've said before, because learners do have access to English outside of the classroom. They can watch YouTube videos, they can listen to TED Talks, they can maybe even interact using Skype or whatever with other English speakers, but most of them won't do that. Their only opportunity to use language is in the classroom. And the only person who is qualified to provide the best conditions for using language is the teacher. So if the teacher is spending all the time teaching the rules of the language, teaching the grammar, and not providing opportunities to use the language, then the students will not be equipped when they encounter situations when they really do have to use it. And when I say use the language, I don't mean practicing grammar exercises. That's not using the language. That's just reinforcing the knowledge. To do 20 exercises about the present perfect continuous is not using the language. Using the language is speaking, listening, reading and writing, yeah? Or if we want to add the fifth skill, according to the Common European Framework, interacting, and mediating, of course, too. But it's using language for the purposes for which it was designed, that is communicating. If the students are not communicating in the classroom, and when I say communicating, I don't mean even interacting. Yeah, when students are interacting, I can interact. I'm interacting with you now in the sense that I'm speaking to you, but you're not speaking back, yeah? I don't even know how many people are listening to me at the moment, and especially when this is recorded. Where is the communication? Where is the conversation? Where is it where I'm actually listening to what you're saying or reading what you're putting into the chat? That is real communication. When you put a message into the chat, which I can read and then I can respond to, that is communication. The moment all we're doing is interacting, we're not even interacting, but this is what happens in classrooms. The teacher sees the students working together, doing an exercise, and they're speaking at each other, but they're not communicating. They're not listening to each other. They're not processing what the other student is saying and dealing with it and responding appropriately in real time. If that's not happening in the classroom, the students are not learning the second language. They're learning about it, but they're not using it, and therefore they're not learning it, and therefore they're not going to be ready in the real world to use it when they really need it. Yeah, so they can do 6 years, 8 years of English in the school, learning grammar, learning a few words, but they were no better off than if they walked out into the street with a translation app on their phone and said, yeah. So unless they're using the language in the classroom, we can't say that they're learning the language. So coming back to the first point then, if we're focusing solely on the grammar, we're reducing what language is all about, but also we're likely to be limiting the opportunities they have to actually use language in a real way. So coming to question 3 about the PPP, yeah, I mean, for teaching about the grammar PPP is as good as anything. Yeah, today we're going to do the present perfect continuous. I'm going to teach you the present perfect. Here is the rule, blah, 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 blah. I mean, they could have done that at home, actually, before the lesson. But, you know, okay, we're going to do it in the class. But if that becomes the lesson and there's no opportunities for practice, remember PPP, the first P is presentation, the second P is practice. The third P, the most important one, is production, when they're actually using it. If they don't get to the production stage, then the lesson is a waste of time, because they're not going to get the production stage outside of the classroom. They're not going to do production for homework. Who are they going to produce? Who are they going to communicate with? 99% of the students do not have access to another speaker of English to practice that particular language point. They're just doing exercises in a homework book. That is not production. That's just practice, but it's the most controlled form of practice. So if you spend all the time in the lesson, the PPP lesson, on the first P, where is the use? Where is the communication? Where is the real language use that activates that first P? Yeah. So the first P should be 5 minutes of the lesson. Yeah. Today we're going to do the present perfect continuous. This is the present perfect continuous. This is an example. This is how you say it in Arabic. This is how you say it in French. Punto. Yeah. Let's move on. Now let's use it. Yeah. Let's do something with it. But if it's more than 5 minutes, where's the practice? Where's the production? Which is why I think question number 4, you know, we have this expectation that students will produce correct examples of the structure after 60 minutes. Well, of course, then they won't. I mean, this is the other thing about grammar teaching. Grammar teaching is not like teaching facts about the history of, you know, North Africa, that in such and such a year, such and such happened, and then that year, so those are facts we can remember, we can reproduce in an exam. Language is not like that. It's not about reproducing facts. And it's not going to happen in 60 minutes. It doesn't happen in 60 minutes in your first language, when you learn, you know, Arabic or French or whatever your first language is as a baby. It took years before you were anything like accurate with the language. It's the same in any language, and it's the same in the second language too. So we cannot expect that just because we present the present perfect continuous in a lesson, that 60 minutes later the students will be producing it perfectly. Of course they won't. Language learning does not operate like that. Language learning is a, you know, 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of process. It's not linear and it's not incremental. And, you know, once we accept that, our job is a lot easier, because we don't feel so bad. Oh no, I taught you this yesterday, why can't you remember it? No, language is not like that. Language is like any other skill, that you get better in little spurts, and then you go back, and then you need to practice, etc. You need to do it, but it's not going to happen just by learning about the language. Which is why, coming to question 5, the passive voice is difficult. Why is the passive voice difficult? Because it's like any grammatical structure. It's not something you can just teach and the students will learn unless they put it to some kind of communicative use. When do we use the passive? Why do we use the passive? What situations do we use the passive in? What verbs do we typically use the passive with? Yeah, like some verbs, we never use the passive. Some verbs, we only use the passive, like born, for example. I was born in such and such a year. That's the passive. We never say, my mother bore me in such and such a year. So we need to know why it is used, when it is used, but not, we need to know that. We need to be in situations where we can actually practice that. Why? What situations will we use the passive in? Well, predominantly writing, we don't use the passive in speaking very much, unless we want to hide the subject of the verb, yeah? Or we don't know the subject of the verb. Yeah, so we can say, oh, my bicycle's been stolen, yeah? My bicycle has been stolen. But even then, we might write that, but we'd probably say, someone stole my bicycle. Someone stole my bicycle. Yeah? Someone stole my bicycle. I don't know who, but someone stole my bicycle. In other words, we don't need the passive. And that's why it's difficult to teach, because 99% of the situations that we teach it in, we don't need it. So when you're teaching the passive, you're probably teaching it because you're teaching academic writing, a special register of writing, in which case, yeah, it's more common. It's still not very common, but it's more common. And therefore, there's more need for it. So that's why the passive is difficult to teach. It's not because it's a concept that is difficult. It's not because it's a structure that's even that difficult. It's because it's not necessary. Yeah, it's very difficult to find situations in which it is necessary. So when we're teaching grammar, just to summarize this, we need to be very selective, first of all, in what we teach. And also we need to be very economical in terms of how we teach it. 5 minutes, the 5-minute rule, 5 minutes only of presentation of grammar. The rest of the time, practice. But I don't mean practice doing exercises. Exercises they can do at home. It's practice in communicative situations. You want to practice the past tense? Then create a situation in which learners are talking about something they did in the past. Yeah? Tell me about your last weekend. Ahmed, tell me about your last weekend. Yeah, Hodder, tell me about your last weekend. Ahmed, tell Hodder about your last weekend. Get into pairs. Yeah, so that they are using it to talk about, okay, find 5 things that you did which were in the same in your last weekend, and 5 things that were different. Yeah, get into pairs, groups of 1, 2, or 3, whatever. But use the language to talk about things that are relevant and that the students have actually done. And the students say, oh, I don't know the words. Well, then teach the words when they need them. Yeah. What is it that you don't need? And that comes back to this, on to this question of use of the first language. Should you use Arabic in the classroom when you're teaching English to Moroccans or French or whatever? Yes. Totally, yes. Why not? If you speak Arabic and they speak Arabic and you're not using Arabic, I mean, what is this game you're playing? It's the nearest, most direct access to the meanings that you're trying to teach. You're teaching a word which you can't illustrate. You know, apple. I can illustrate apple. I can find an apple. I can draw an apple. But other words, which are much more complex and abstract, like, you know, beauty or peace or freedom or whatever, how am I going to teach those? I can only teach those by reference to the first language. This is how you say it in Arabic. This is the word, this is its translation. If you don't do that, you're going to waste an enormous amount of time and students are going to be very frustrated. And people say, oh, but they won't learn to think in English. Nobody thinks in English. You think in your first language. For the rest of your life, you will think in Arabic, you will think in French. You will never think in English until you're incredibly advanced and probably have lived in an English-speaking country a number of times. It's a mythology, the idea that learners will one day think in English. No. They'll function in English, yeah, but their first language will always be Arabic or Berber or French or whatever, but it won't be English. And there's no way that we can, you know, transplant, this is science fiction, that we can transplant English and turn it into their first language. No. So forget about this thing. Translation is a fantastic device for teaching languages. People have known that for centuries. They've always used the first language to teach the second language. Suddenly, in the 20th century, people said, oh no, this is a very bad thing. And it's not. It's the only way. Doesn't mean to say that you speak Arabic 90% of the time in the class. No. But when you need to explain something, what's the problem? It's not about the slow students. It's about every student. It's just so economical. Just do it. Yeah, get it over with. Because that means your 5 minutes of grammar teaching really is 5 minutes. Yeah. You want to learn the passive? This is the passive in English. This is how we say it in Arabic. Look at the difference. Look at the similarities. When do we use it? Yeah. End of story. 5 minutes. Now we spend the rest of the lesson in English using the passive. Which brings us to speaking skills and fluency. How do you teach speaking? Well, you teach speaking by speaking. Yeah, you teach speaking by speaking. You don't teach about speaking. You have students have to do some speaking. That was the whole point of the communicative approach. The communicative approach was like, for me personally, I was very lucky when the communicative approach arrived. I had been teaching 1 or 2 years teaching a direct method kind of methodology, no translation, accuracy, 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 grammar syllabus, repeat, 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 drill, 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 no mistakes, etc. And then the communicative approach came along and said, well, actually, accuracy is not the main aim of language learning. It's about communication, it's about fluency. And that therefore we should provide more opportunities in the classroom for students to experience fluency, experience real communication. How do they do that? Well, we can give them activities where they have to interact, but one student has some information and the other student has other information, and they have to kind of share that information in other words, to do the task. So, I mean, a classic communicative activity would be, I have a picture and I'm going to describe it to you and you're going to draw it. Yeah. Or I'm going to draw a picture of a room or an island or a face or whatever, or an animal, and I'm going to describe it to you and you're going to draw it. Now, how are you going to do that? Well, you're going to have to listen. This is the communication. Yeah. It's not just interaction. You're going to listen. And if you don't understand something, what are you going to do? If you don't understand me, you're going to ask. That's communication. Yeah. Communication is all about not just transferring information, but it's about negotiation. I don't understand. What was that word you said? There's something in the middle of the island. It's a volcano. What's a volcano? I'll tell you in Arabic. Yeah, that's negotiation. That's what language learning is all about. So those are the kinds of tasks that we need to provide students so they can experience real communication, even at low levels. The beginner's level, they can do that. People say, oh, no, we can't. You have to spend, oh, no, they have to know the grammar, they have to know lots of vocabulary before they can speak. No. Babies can speak in their first language, just saying things like, oh, daddy driving, mummy also driving. They don't need a huge vocabulary. Certainly, they don't need an elaborated grammar to be able to communicate. If we tell them, oh, you can only communicate if you're 100% accurate, of course, they won't communicate. But you say, tell me what it is you're trying to say. Tell me what it is you're trying to say. Tell me in Arabic. And I will tell you in English. And then you can repeat. Yeah. But it's all about communication. And it's all about communicating things that are sort of kind of relevant to the learners. So coming to the second question, I would just say it's a continuation of the first question, really. You just carry on doing lots of speaking activities. And if it's not speaking the students need, if it's writing, then you do lots of writing activities, and it's listening, etc. And if you don't know what it is the students will need eventually, then you do a mixture of everything, but skills, 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 lots of speaking, lots of listening, lots of reading, lots of writing. Now, the reading and writing, a lot of that can be done at home, but there's also a virtue, especially nowadays online, there's a lot of good to be got out of students doing writing collaboratively, yeah, in groups. Because when they're doing writing, they've got a writing task and they have to do it together. They're also going to be speaking. What's the best way to teach speaking and make students effective communicate without having a noisy classroom? I mean, noise, noise, language is noise. You can't teach language without noise. It doesn't mean to say people have to be screaming and shouting and laughing and carrying on. People can talk quietly in pairs. But, you know, until there are other teachers banging on the wall, and I think that's a very good sign. I remember once I did a class, and in fact, I remember this class distinctly because there was a Moroccan student in it, and this was a class in London years ago, and I did an activity, which was a communicative activity. It was a kind of game. This was beginners, yeah, and the students were screaming because it was a competition, and this woman who was Moroccan, I remember that, said to me, "I have never laughed so much in a classroom." And I had to stop the activity because the teacher next door was banging on the wall and said, you know, please keep the noise down. But that's a good sign. Yeah, that's what a language class should be like. A mathematics class, a geography class, a history class, no, quiet. A language class should be noisy. If it's not noisy, it's not a language class. And this question number 4 is a very good one because it reminds us that speaking is about interaction. Yeah, speaking is interactive and requires the ability to cooperate in the management of speaking turns. Yes, that's what I said before. It's all about cooperation, negotiation. I didn't understand you. Can you? Sorry, etc. And it takes place in real time. When we're speaking, we don't have a lot of time to think and plan and prepare. That's the challenge of speaking. Even in your first language, it can be a challenge if you're suddenly put on the spot. Somebody says to you, "Oh, Scott, could you thank the speaker at this conference?" You know, you've got to get up and say, "Oh, I'm not used to this. This is so formal, and I wasn't even listening," etc. So, I mean, we've all been in situations like that. So we need to take that into account when we're doing things in the classroom. We need to give students planning time, sometimes rehearsal time, but it's also good sometimes to do things where they don't have time to plan and rehearse, so they can experience what it's like to speak spontaneously and to use all their resources, and not just their linguistic, not just the grammar, but the vocabulary, and also their gesture, their body language, etc., to convey the meaning. Because we've all been in situations like that as speakers of a second language, where we've come up against a communication problem and we've had to kind of be resourceful, as that, you know, and do whatever we can to get the meaning across. So learners need to experience, and the beauty of the classroom, the great thing about classrooms is that it's a safe space. Yeah, when you're learning to fly a plane, for example, I mean, I have nothing, I know, but apparently people who learn to fly planes are put into special, like, simulators. Yeah, it's just a machine that looks like a plane, it feels like a plane, but it's not a plane. But they get the whole experience of being as if it were flying a plane. Yeah, and this is what the classroom does. The classroom is not real life, it's a simulator of real life, but we need to make that simulator as near as possible real life. So we have to have students doing things that are like real life. And if the students are only sitting down when they're using language, if they're sitting at their desk always, that's not real life, because when we speak a second language, we stand up sometimes, we move around. So you've got to think of activities where the students are standing up, come to the front of the class, do the dialogue in front of the class. Yeah? Stand up, because then it's more like the real world and you're better prepared for the real world and you know how resourceful you can be. But if you do all the activities like this, blah, 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 that's not preparation for real language use. So yeah, coming back to question number 4, I think one of the reasons teachers perhaps avoid speaking activities is because they think it's going to be too hard, or it's too noisy, or it's too demanding, on the students to do. But we need to put students in positions to, with a bit of preparation, but from time to time where they're experiencing the psychological conditions of real language use. Aziz, how are we going for time? Shall I continue?
It's good.
The time
Yes.
is good, yeah? Okay. I believe you. Let's
Yes.
move on. The next question about pronunciation, which is, as I said before, is related to speaking. It's neglected. And why? And I think one of the reasons is, well, there are many reasons. One of the reasons may be that teachers themselves feel that they're not a good model of native speaker-like pronunciation, and therefore they don't feel equipped to model it or teach it. If your first language is not English, you don't feel confident in modeling, demonstrating the pronunciation of English, which is a valid anxiety for most languages. But I say for English, it's not valid, because English is not the property of native speakers. It's the one language in the world, or one of the few, I mean, Arabic may be another, that belongs to not just the native speakers, but anyone who wants to speak English for communication purposes globally. And therefore the pronunciation doesn't have to be the native speaker model. Yeah. So if your student from Morocco is communicating with a speaker from Russia in English, they don't have to sound like the Queen. In fact, if they did sound like the Queen of England, it would be ridiculous. Yeah. All they have to do is be intelligible to each other. Yeah. That's the bottom line. If one of them has a Moroccan accent and the other one has a Russian accent, it doesn't matter. In fact, it would be strange if one of them had an American accent and one of them had a Chinese accent. The bottom line is intelligibility. So as a teacher, all you have to do is teach language and make sure the pronunciation would be intelligible in a wide range of circumstances. And remember, intelligibility is not just about pronunciation. Intelligibility is also about how you present yourself, how you move, how you get around difficulties in communication, how you compensate, etc. So the question number 2, why is pronunciation so difficult to learn, especially in EFL settings? That's because maybe we're still insisting on native speaker-like pronunciation. And as I said, that's a kind of, it's the wrong target. Also, there is no native speaker English pronunciation because there are so many different kinds of native speakers. I'm a native speaker of English, but I don't come from England. I don't come from America. I don't come from Canada. I come from a country nobody's ever heard of called New Zealand. So we have our own kind of English. But I speak New Zealand English, but does it matter? I mean, nobody's going to go to New Zealand. You can't go at the moment. It's completely closed off because of the pandemic. But does it matter? No. I'm not a better teacher of English because I am a native speaker. No. My native speaker accent is no advantage. It's not for the Moroccan who's speaking to the Russian, for the Japanese who's speaking to the Brazilian. So, you know, pronunciation shouldn't be so difficult to teach if we keep our ears open to not what is native speaker like, but what is intelligible. Would I understand that? Would I understand that? Now, that's not easy because we can't predict, we don't know in what situations the learners are going to be in. But, you know, intelligibility, I think, is a more reasonable target than native speaker-like pronunciation. We don't want our learners to sound like the Queen. It's not going to do them any good. Yeah. The bottom line is intelligibility. And then that brings us to my favorite subject, which is vocabulary. How are we going?
Yes, yes. Vocabulary is really an area that it is problematic for most teachers.
Yes. And do you know why? Because two reasons. Because they spend so much time teaching grammar, they don't leave any time for teaching vocabulary. That's reason number one. Reason number two is that for grammar, there are, like in English, how many tenses, aspects, etc.? A dozen. How many words are there? 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 10,000. People still don't know how many words it's necessary to get to B2 level. Yeah, but it's like 5,000 words for B2 probably. That's a lot of words. You can't teach those in class time. Yeah, 5,000 words. You divide those 5,000 words into how many hours do you have a week with your students? 2 hours, 3 hours? How many weeks do you have in a year? 30, 20, I don't know. How many years do you have before they get to their exams? 5. You can't teach. Well, you have to do two things. You have to impress on your students the importance of vocabulary. And then you have to give them the strategies and skills to do vocabulary learning outside the classroom. What kind of things can they do outside the classroom? Well, reading, listening, yeah. But, you know, how many of our students read and listen even in their first language outside the classroom? It's not going to be enough. What they're going to have to do is get some kind of app like Quizlet, on their phone, and they're going to have to put in words that they learn in class, words that relate to their work or their studies, words that they read. If they do read, they have to put all these words into their Quizlet, and they have to test themselves every time they're on the bus or they're at the gym. They have to test themselves on their words, and that's the only way they're going to increase the vocabulary. And how do they test themselves? Because they have the Arabic on one side and the English on the other. And so they look at the English word and say, what's that word in English, in Arabic? And then they go back the other direction from the Arabic to English, which is the hard direction, and try to retrieve the word from memory. And they do that again and again and again and again and again and again and again until they know that word and they can take that word off and add more words to their list. And that's the best way of learning vocabulary. And question number 2, for learning chunks. So it's not just about learning individual words, it's learning words in combination, expressions, phrases, etc. Yeah, and that that is 90% of what language learning is all about. It's not learning about the grammar. The grammar is the glue that sticks the words together. It's kind of useful, but you've got to have the words. So we've got to say to the students, it's not enough to know 200 words in English. It's just, you won't be able to understand anything you read, and you won't be able to communicate. You've got to have 2,000 words. Yeah, and I can't teach you those 2,000 words as your teacher. I wish I could, but I can't. There isn't time. All I can do is show you how you can learn those 2,000 words on your own. And if you don't do that, then you're not going to pass the exam. You're not going to be able to read a book. You're not going to be able to communicate. Yeah. So that's the problem. Yeah. Number one, that's the problem. It's communicating that to the learner, say that I can't do it for you. I simply can't. I can do a lot of work with vocabulary in the classroom, but I can't get you to that number of words which is necessary to become communicative at B2 level, let's say. So that's why, question 4, the students don't reproduce the words that we teach them in their writing. Well, because probably they haven't learned them, because, to learn a word, you need to have met it lots of times, and you need to have retrieved it, coming to point 3 here, retrieve it from memory lots of times. But, you can only do so many things. If you're teaching learners, I don't know, what's the average number of hours that a student has in a public school in Morocco of English a week? 2-3 hours? That's not enough to learn 5,000 words. So we need to motivate learners. We need to tell them, look, the bottom line is, if you don't learn any grammar, don't learn any pronunciation, don't learn anything, but learn words and word combinations. If you do nothing else, learn words. And you can learn a lot through reading, but reading and writing things down. It's not enough just to read. You need to pay attention to the difficult words. You need to look them up in the dictionary, write them down, review them, put them into sentences, etc. Do all sorts of things with those words. Otherwise, they're not going to be available. This is a big question. This is a whole talk. I mean, this is a whole hour I could deal talking about this, so I won't. I'll move on. Testing, another one, big one. Testing, professional development. If you are listening to this now, you are doing professional development. And if you are talking about it at the same time, on chatting with somebody else about it online or directly, you're doing very good professional development. If you re-watch this video, or if you send it on to friends and talk about it, you're doing very good professional development. If you follow Everyone Academy regularly and listen to what Aziz recommends you listen to it, you're doing professional development. Yeah. So nowadays we are very lucky in the sense that professional development is available to us free online around the clock. We should take advantage of it. So I don't need to tell you this because you're already doing it. Yeah. Maybe you need to tell your friends and your colleagues. Yeah. Join Everyone Academy and watch the talks, because this is the very good form of professional development. And that comes to the second question about technology. We're using how you use technology in the classroom depends on your learners and your context, etc., and what they have available. But the bottom line is start with the tools that they already use. So if your students are using WhatsApp, fine, use WhatsApp. If they're using Padlet or Quizlet or all these other things, then fine, use those. If they're not, it's not the end of the world. You don't have to keep teaching them new apps and tools and things if they're not already using them. If they're using Instagram, then you can use English for, you can do things and tell them what to look at on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever. Yeah, but find out what it is that they're using and exploit that. That's probably enough. YouTube, I mean, is brilliant. Of course, we know that because it's a huge amount of text in English. And not only that, text, videos, etc., which have transcripts in English, even if it's just songs, but if the words are there written, well, that's useful. My books are extremely useful. Well, I'm glad to know that. I have no future writing projects at the moment. I'm too busy giving talks like this and editing other people's books. I edit a series for Cambridge, which is fantastic. The pocket books, yeah, and this is my opportunity to do a bit of advertising. So we have pocket books this is for teaching primary children. This is Cambridge University Press. This is tips for teaching pronunciation, 50 tips. Fantastic book, this. Scott Thornbury, I even wrote a book, 101 grammar questions. Herbert Puchter, this is a new one, tips for teaching teenagers. Who doesn't want a book like that? So it's a fantastic series. So I spend a lot of time editing those books, and it's one of the most worthwhile things I do. Aziz, I think it's probably time, to finish. I don't think. Do you have any other questions you want to ask me before I finish?
Yes, I just want to thank you for this very great session. I was waiting for you to say that you have plans to write books, but you are editing books, which is also in some way it makes you get inspired to write about other books. Because I read some of your books, they are really practical and useful. I am not saying this because you are in front of me, but this is this is the truth. So thank you so much for this. Do you have any final comments for everyone?
No, just to say that I'm looking forward to the day when I can return to real traveling and visiting countries. And of course, Morocco is so close to where I am in Spain, and it's the obvious destination when and if I start visiting teachers again at conferences and schools, etc. So I, inshallah, hopefully I'll be back in Morocco within a short amount of time. But if not, to all my friends in Morocco, all my teaching friends and my publishing friends and my friends' friends, stay safe, and I hope to see you soon.
So thank you so much, Scott, and you are welcome anytime. You are welcome.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.